Well, welcome everyone. Today is December 25th, 2021, and I welcome you to today's Bible study. And we're going to continue the series of studies that we began several weeks ago. We had a break last week, but I'd like to continue today and delve into the part three of what is going to be a several part series. I anticipate that we're going to have at least another three parts, maybe four, to cover this entire topic on what we're calling the new humanity. For those who have not been on in the previous studies, we're covering this topic called the new humanity, and we're using as the basis of our study the material from a group called the Bible Project, run by Tim Mackie and his staff in Portland, Oregon. And he has excellent material, and we wanted to go through that material and look at the finer points. And of course, I add my own verses and commentary to that. But we're using that as the basis of our study, and we've already taken a look at the first two sections of that, and so that you know what we're speaking of, I'm going to bring it on screen in just a moment here so that you can see the uh, the actual material. So just give me a moment to bring that up on screen, and you will be able to see that. And you will have noted when I sent the invitation for today's study that I included several links in there, and one of the links is to these notes, these written notes that I'm going to share on screen right now. And I also sent a link to several videos. So if you look at the very beginning of this study, this is part of a broader study from the Bible Project called Spiritual Beings. And we're looking at part 7, the new humanity. And that begins around page 63 or so. And we've already covered the first couple of parts, actually the first three sections we've covered, talking about how the biblical story works. And if you recall, we're talking just by means of, thank you for that, by means of quick review, because it's been a week, we're looking at a broad storyline in the sacred scriptures, which begins with Yahshua the Messiah in the center, right? So we have Yahshua's storyline. Let me see if I can bring my pointer up. I'll just bring the spotlight. So we have Yahshua right here in the middle, in the center. And of course, everything in the scriptures ultimately points to him, ultimately points to Yahshua. And let me see if I can move this here. Hold on, guys. There we go. Okay. But so when we're looking at Yahshua's story, it doesn't come onto the scene without context, right? And the context of Yahshua's story is it broadens out in concentric, not circles here necessarily, but in this diagram in rectangles, right? So if you look at Yahshua's storyline in the center, when you push out from that, you have the broader storyline of Israel, of the nation of Israel. But it doesn't end there either, right? It goes broader out to what Tim Mackie calls the cosmic storyline, which is the storyline of really the universe, right? The created world and everything in it. So technically speaking, when you're saying cosmic storyline, you're talking about the world, right? Not the universe per se, which of course Yahweh created as well. But the cosmic storyline is the earth and its entire history, all of humankind, all of humanity, in other words. And the idea that we took a look at in the first few lessons, we started out with the cosmic storyline, right, which is the broad definition and the broad story of Genesis that began from Genesis 1 through Genesis 11 of humanity being placed on this earth to be stewards of Yahweh's creation, right? So Adam and Eve, and they were created male and female, Adam and Eve, but they were created to be, in effect, priests, royalty, right? They were created to reign as viceroys, if you will, together with Yahweh, to reign the earth. They were told, be fruitful and multiply. So let me stop sharing this and let me take you to the scriptures. And if you go to, let's say, Genesis 1, we're told that in verse 26 that Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." So man was created to be an image bearer. Man was created and male, he was made male and female. Man was created to glorify Yahweh, to to reflect his glory to all of the earth, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing of the earth. So he was made, man was made, and Adam was made to have rule, to have stewardship over the earth. Elohim blessed them, verse 28, and Elohim said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And then he says he gave them every plant yielding seed on the surface of the earth, and every tree for food, etc. So he made man, Yahweh, so that mankind could be stewards of the earth. And as you compare these scriptures in Genesis with other scriptures, you will find that in effect, what Yahweh did was he created Adam in a sort of priesthood, royalty, to be stewards over the earth. And then mankind, because of the fall in the garden, mankind rejected that vocation to be image bearers, to be stewards and rulers with Yahweh. And the remainder of the Bible, from the remainder of Genesis through the book of Revelation, is the record of Almighty Yahweh bringing man slowly back to Eden, because when he saw that he was not fulfilling his vocation, he expelled him from the garden. He put him in exile of the garden, so that from the garden, so that he could not partake of the tree of life. And the reason why he didn't want mankind to partake of the tree of life is not necessarily punitive, right? It wasn't necessarily punishment as everyone views it, but really it was a work of compassion. It was an act of grace. Because in man's condition, in his fallen condition, if Yahweh allowed him to reach out and take from the tree of life, then man would live forever. And he would live forever, but not in the state in which Yahweh wanted him to live, which is in a state of joy and of intimacy and of and all the good things that Yahweh wanted for mankind. But because of the fall, he would live forever in a state of corruption, and Yahweh did not want that to happen. So yes, there was an element of punishment, there was an element of consequence in expelling him from the garden. And when I say him, of course, I'm referring to male and female, right? Adam. So there's an element of punishment in sending them out, but more importantly, there's that grace and that compassion that shines through, in which Yahweh said, "I don't want you to live forever in a state of corruption. I want you to live life abundantly, the way it was meant to be lived, the way I created you to live." And therefore he expelled him from the garden, but he didn't leave it at that, right? In Genesis 3:15, he gave man the promise of a savior, right? So if you look at Genesis 3:15, he says specifically, and there's more to it in the context, of course, but he says specifically, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman." So he's talking to the serpent in this particular instance. And he's saying, "I'm going to put a condition of being enemies between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, your descendants and and your descendant serpent and her descendants. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." So they were going to hurt each other, right? So he would eventually be conquered. He would be bruised on the head. In other words, the serpent's head, the serpent being the representative of evil, the serpent's head would be crushed eventually, but not before he would bruise him on the heel. And this is precisely what happened in the course of history. So, if you go by extension to a verse such as Romans 16:20, Paul says the Elohim of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet, and that's an allusion to what you see in Genesis 3:15. So scholars recognize Genesis 3:15 as being a messianic promise. So going back to our diagram, and for those of you who are just joining, I'm just doing a quick review of what we've covered so far about the new humanity. So going back to our diagram, so in this cosmic storyline, you have the story of humanity, of humankind, of Adam. And of course, represented by Adam, the proper name now, Adam the male, the man. Adam represents the first priest, if you will, who failed in his vocation, who rejected his vocation. And there's so much more that we could speak of with regard to that, but it's not necessary at the moment. By the way, is my screen sharing coming through still? Great. So Genesis 1 through 11 is the initial record of humanity being created. Humankind is given a vocation. He rejects the vocation, and then he's exiled from the garden. And then a second Adam, right? Then we look. There's Noah, right, who is in effect given the responsibility that Adam had been given. He's also a steward, but he also falls even after the flood. You see the description of a fall with Noah and his descendancy, and then you see it later on with others as well. There seems to be many successors who have a piece of trying to restore that vocation, but yet they all come short. Good intentions, decent people, faithful people, someone like Abraham, someone like David, but always flawed in their story. So the Genesis story from 1 to 11 is a record of humanity in the beginning up until the Tower of Babel. And at the Tower of Babel, Yahweh separates humanity so that they cannot carry out their plans for self-aggrandizement, right? Because it becomes about reaching the goals that Yahweh reaches, but on their terms, for them, from humanity's sake, not for Yahweh's sake. In other words, they become, in effect, they go down a road of image bearing for themselves, which is idolatry, right? Instead of image bearing for Almighty Yahweh. So immediately following on the heels of Genesis 11, in Genesis 12 is the story of Israel, which begins with, of course, with Abraham. So we go from the cosmic storyline to Israel's storyline. And then from Abraham all the way to the Messiah, you have this pattern repeated again and again. So Abraham has a piece of it, and he is called to do very special things, and he does some of that, but he doesn't completely fulfill it. And then you have someone like Joseph, who also has pieces of that, but does not fulfill it. And of course, Jacob, right, as Israel. Before that, before Joseph, I omitted Jacob. So, and then later on in history, you have a figure such as David, right? And before David, you have Moses, right? So Moses, each one of these has, and I'm going out of order here. I should have just kind of followed the storyline here, but this is what we've covered in the first few lessons. The Israel storyline talks about Noah, talks about Abraham, talks about Joseph, okay? Eventually talks about Moses, eventually talks about David. All of these are priest-like figures. Please understand, I'm not saying that they were priests in the literal sense of the term, in the proper sense of the term, because of course the priests came, ultimately in the lineage of Israel. It came from the lineage of Levi. None of these individuals were priests, but they were priests-like in their vocation. And Yahweh was using these individuals to witness and restore what Adam had dropped. And to a certain degree, they did that, but they failed because of their shortcomings and their failures. But they all, in some way, shape, or form, pointed to the one who would, in fact, fulfill that vocation. In other words, none of them were the true human, if you will, to the degree that Yahweh intended them to be. None of them, and I bring you back to the diagram, none of them fulfilled that full humanity. And, I've often said to you that I don't like to hear when people say, when they're trying to talk about, excuse someone, someone from a moral failure or sin or whatever it may be. I don't like to hear when people say, oh, he's only human or she's only human, because that should be a compliment. That's not an insult. That's not a pejorative. That's a grand thing to be human, because to be human, in the sense that Yahweh describes it in the Word, is to fulfill the vocation that Yahweh gave for you. So if you say he's only human, then that should be, your standard should be very high for that. It's not the other way around, the way the world views that only human means that you fail. That's not the failure part of humanity is not the predominant thing that should come out. The ultimate course for humanity, the ultimate outcome for humanity, is to be restored as the image bearer in its fullest sense for Almighty Yahweh. And that's what this whole storyline is about. That's what this new humanity is about. Why new? Because ultimately, whereas everyone else failed, there's one who didn't fail. And that's Yahshua, right? So if you look at the record in the scriptures, you're talking, and I've explained this when I've talked about, for example, Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is the prime verse, a passage of scripture that's referred to as, when you refer to Yahshua, as the suffering servant. And as I've explained many times, when you look at the language in Isaiah 53, and this term, this passage, right? Let me pull it up here so I'm not misquoting it. So Isaiah 53, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, right? And this is all a description of him, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. And it describes, he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Clearly, this is referring to the one that we know as Yahshua, the Messiah. But when you talk to individuals who don't believe, who are not Christians, people who do not believe in the Messiah of the New Testament, then they're going to say, who is this? Who is this servant? Well, this is part of a greater poem of the servant songs of Isaiah. And many commentators, non-Christian commentators, will say, well, this is referring to Israel, this suffering servant. And in the past, I bristled at that, because I said, no, it's not referring to Israel, because everything here is, described in the pronouns as a he, right? But that's really not entirely correct. It's really both. Because when you look at the entirety of these servant songs, it is talking about Israel, the nation. But when you get to Isaiah 53, and not just Isaiah 53, other sections as well, but especially in Isaiah 53, at that point, it's no longer talking about the nation of Israel. And what has happened? What has happened, because, it's clearly pronouns that are referring to an individual. And some people may say that's poetic. I don't believe so. I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe that it's referring to a specific Israelite, because Israel was meant to be a witness to the nations. That's the whole Israel story, yes? But because Israel, going all the way back to, to Jacob and Isaac and I guess Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and eventually to Moses and everyone else, their vocation, what they were meant to do, was to restore humanity back to a condition of meeting their vocation, right? So it's like you have Genesis 11, which is the Tower of Babel, and mankind is dispersed, and immediately following on the heels, there's no coincidence in the scriptures, immediately following on the heels of the confusion of Babylon, and there's always that confusion between Babylon and Yahweh's way, right? It's that counterfeit. Babylon is a counterfeit of the real deal. Babylon, man's way, and then there's Yahweh's way. Nebuchadnezzar and the golden head of the statue in the book of Daniel. Again, the golden head represents Babylon, right? Who thinks. The head is what thinks. So everything that happens in politics and government and everything else is with the head of Babylon, if you will. The thought, the thinking of Babylon. Again, mankind trying to do it his own way for his own benefit and self-aggrandizement, and not Yahweh's way, you see. But ultimately, it's the stone that's cut by Almighty Yahweh, and then it crushes the last part of the statue and destroys it forever. And it's that kingdom that fills the entire earth. You see it again and again throughout the scriptures. You see. So the idea that you're seeing described in all of this is that the Israel story ultimately leads to one Israelite, because Israel, in all those many manifestations, they came close, but they didn't come close enough, because there was only one who could do it, and that's an innocent. And that one, very obviously, is Yahshua the Messiah, right? And I seem to have lost, there we go, my pointer. So let me get that back. Okay. So by the time you get to Isaiah 53, it's that one witness. He's the one that's able to complete everything. He's the one that's going to take them out of exile, you see. He's the one that's going to defeat the powers of darkness. He's the one that's going to crush the serpent's head. And we're going to see more about animals and beasts as we go through this particular lesson today. But I wanted to bring you through the review of where we've been so that you can understand where we're going. And you can see much more detail when you go back through all this material. I would encourage you to do that and to watch some of these videos, because I think that you'll be encouraged by that, and it'll really help you to understand. But let's go to the material for today. And to do this, we're going to have a bit of, in fact, what amounts to some review of what we did several weeks ago as we went through the book of Daniel. If you recall, I took you through pretty extensively through Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 in particular, and to a lesser extent Daniel chapter 9. And these are tricky things to go through, because when you're talking about prophetic elements, and particularly what's considered apocalyptic literature, there's some considerations that make it a little bit challenging. And just as a reminder, when I say apocalyptic literature, you know, the word apocalypse has a bad rap in our modern day, and people think that when you talk about an apocalypse, you're talking about some worldwide destruction. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's not what. That's how, in common parlance and culture, the words have been perverted and twisted in ways that they were never intended to be. But when you're talking about apocalyptic literature, you're talking about revelation from Almighty Yahweh, something that has always been, but it's as if you're removing a veil and you're revealing it now to everyone, right? And this is what you see when you look at literature such as the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation, which draws heavily from Daniel and Ezekiel and Zechariah and some other places. But one of the things that you really want to do when you're looking at apocalyptic is you want to understand that you're dealing with a lot of metaphor, right? There are many metaphorical allusions and descriptive language. And much of that, by definition, is not to be taken literally necessarily, okay? But the book of Daniel is full of that. And Daniel chapter 7 in particular gives us in effect, what it gives us is an overview of the entire biblical story, is what it does, kind of in a nutshell. So let me just kind of take you through Daniel 7 very quickly, and then we'll look at it in greater detail. As an introduction, though, I want to take you to the Bible Project material, right? So he says, Daniel 7, the Israel story and the cosmic story come together. That's exactly right. So now you understand what I mean when I say the Israel story and the cosmic story. So, and I said, by the way, that we covered 3 parts. I think we only did 2. I think we may have combined a couple of things together. But anyway, so he says, check out the Bible Project video on the Son of Man for a summary of these ideas, and our Son of Man podcast series for an in-depth exploration of this biblical theme. I would encourage you to do that. I haven't heard the entire podcast series, but I've heard at least the first lesson, and it's Absolutely fantastic. What I want to do at this point, as before we go into this material, is in case you haven't done it, and I always encourage you to do it when I put it out there. I'm actually going to take you through. We're going to do it together. The 5 minute introductory video, because it's going to cover a lot in 5 minutes, much better than I probably would do. Okay, so give me a second, and I'm going to share that video. So bear with me, and it's going to give you a very, very good understanding of what the term "Son of Man" is referring to. Okay, and actually, I tell you what, let's read through Daniel 7 first, because I think it'll help to solidify what you're seeing in this video. Okay, so in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, so Daniel is in captivity along with his Jewish friends. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, very similar to Revelation, right? And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And there's symbolism in all these things that we don't have time to go into right now, but there's all kinds of symbolism going on here. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. This sharing is coming through, yes? This text. Okay, thank you. The first was like verse 4. The first was like a lion, and the wings had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, the second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. To have dominion means to have authority and rule over something, right? After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns, and horns represent powers, authorities. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Again, this is imagery that is very evident in the book of Revelation, and this is where it comes from. I kept looking, verse 9, until thrones were set up. Notice, by the way, it's thrones, plural, multiple. I don't want you to lose sight of that. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Well, who is the Ancient of Days? The Ancient of Days, very clearly, is Yahweh himself. His vesture, his clothing, his vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. This imagery is very similar to what you see in the book of Ezekiel. It's also something that you see similarly in the book of Revelation in chapter 1. A river, so he's sitting on a throne, and this is a mobile throne, if you will. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. So frequently Yahweh is manifested in the scriptures as a flame, right? As a fire. As a consuming fire. You see that at the burning bush, right? Or you see that in Israel's travels in the wilderness as Yahweh's fire consumed on the edges of the camp, right? Or you see it in the pillar of cloud and fire. Fire is a very prominent manifestation of Yahweh's power. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. This is the heavenly court, right? Myriads upon myriads were standing before him, his attendants. The court sat and the books were open. So there's a judicial proceeding that's occurring here. Is this literal? Is this metaphorical? Maybe a little of both, right? Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. So the horn is doing this, right? This is what mankind typically does. They think they have power. It's like this is Psalm 2 imagery, right? This is, let me go over to Psalm 2. I said I was going to start with Mark earlier, and we haven't gotten to Mark yet, so we'll get to it. Psalm 2. This is boastful stuff, right? Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. We're not going to be ruled by them. We're not going to listen to what they have to say. We're going to tear their, whatever shackles they have on us, we're going to throw them off. But verse 4, he who sits in the heavens, he who sits on his throne, the Ancient of Days, laughs. Yahweh scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Who is that king? That king clearly is Yahshua. I will surely tell of the decree of Yahweh. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship Yahweh with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son. In other words, worship the Son. Some versions say kiss the Son. Means same thing. Worship. Do homage. Worship the Son that he not become angry and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all those who take refuge in him as opposed to go against him, right? So you see these things going on here, and it's imagery that's being brought to bear in the same passage here. So this horn is speaking all this arrogance, and Yahweh, he knows that it's his king that's going to be installed. As for the rest of the beast, so he says, then I kept looking, verse 11, this is back to Daniel 7:11. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every last element of that because it's not the point of today's study. But what I do want you to notice is this concept of beasts, this concept of animals, right? First of all, what you're seeing there in those initial verses of Daniel 7 are descriptions of empires, okay? Of, the Babylonian Empire, followed by the Persians and the Medes, followed by the Greeks, and ultimately by Rome. And these are the major powers up until that time that were the major empires on the earth. But they all have commonalities, right? And one of the commonalities is that they treat people as if they're animals. They hold people in servitude and slavery. They're oppressors. They cause great suffering, and there's great abuse of power. And they act as animals without conscience. Worse than animals, really, because at least animals act according to instinct and do the glory of Yahweh through their instinct. But these guys do worse. This is why there's always a distortion. So they look like animals, but there's always something perverted about them because they're not even natural animals, right? And we can speak much more of that. But the point is that they're beasts, and they don't rule with justice and mercy and love and compassion. They rule with rigor. They rule like Egypt ruled. They rule by the power of their might as if they are anything important. They rule by the power of their mouth, and they tear down with their mouth, and they tear down by violence, and they tear down by torture, and they tear down by oppression. You see, they're animals, worse than animals. They're malformed animals. So Yahweh's watching all this and seeing them and hearing them do this, and all of a sudden, in the course of time, Yahweh sends one to finally crush their rebellion. And this is where we're leading, right? Because this is what has happened, because this goes way, it goes all the way back to the garden. The serpent, a serpent that is talking, and a serpent that is talking with forked tongue, so to speak, right? This is not natural. There's something wrong with that manifestation, right? And it continues to the present day. That serpent, like Yahshua says to the teachers of the law, he says, you're like your father, the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning. What does that mean? It means he's engaged in character assassination. From the very beginning, from the garden, he was responsible to assassinate Yahweh's character, and by extension, he assassinated the vocation of the ones who were created in Yahweh's image, you understand? So he set the pattern that would be followed throughout all of history by every ruler, by every nation, where they would rule with rigor and with violence, as opposed to Yahweh, who rules with justice and compassion and love and peace. This is why when the disciples come to Yahshua in Mark 10, and they say to him, Master, when you come into your kingdom, let one of us be on your right and one on your left, or some such thing. And Yahshua says, no, you don't understand. This is how the Gentiles do it. We're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it the other way. The Gentiles rule with rigor and with, imposing their thing on everybody and crushing everything in their way. That's not how we're going to do it. We're going to do it through love, through compassion. We're going to do it through grace. We're going to do it through justice. And that's how the kingdom is going to be established. In other words, we're going to restore you to Eden, right? The way that Eden was meant to be. Eden was taken down by violence, but it's going to be restored by peace. And how is it going to be restored? It's going to be restored through a cross. Because here's what happened. I'm giving you a big preview here. We're going to get back to Daniel 7, I promise. But I want you to really understand this. It's a preview of what's to come. Because the cross of Yahshua, that was meant to humiliate him, right? It was the greatest world power that existed up until that time. Perhaps in all of history, because even today, you have, the great power of the United States and, Great Britain, etc. I don't know that if you compare side by side, comparatively speaking, if anything has ever matched the power, comparatively speaking, to the Roman Empire and the extent and breadth of the Roman Empire, right? So one could argue that there's never been a power as great as the Roman Empire or ever will be on the earth. So Yahshua's coming on the scene at that time was very deliberately placed by Almighty Yahweh. Why didn't he come now instead of then? Right? So it's very likely that the lesson there is that there may never have been a power like that and may never will be a power like that. But the point is that the Romans meant to crush anything in their way. As I've explained, they took slaves and they took criminals and they crucified them, which is considered perhaps the worst punishment that you could do, because it was meant to humiliate. It was meant to show everyone, this is what happens to you. This is your fate if you happen to cross us. No pun intended, right? If you come against us in any way, this is what's going to happen to you. This is your lot. You have no chance. You stand no chance against us. I described how after the Spartacus rebellion, many of you may be familiar with Spartacus, the slave. After the Spartacus rebellion was put down, there was some figure, I want to say something like 6,000 slaves. Maybe I'm a little bit off on that, but it was in the thousands. 6,000 slaves who were crucified along the Roman way between, and I forget what it was, between Rome and something or else. And it was about 100 miles, about the distance in the modern day from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. That's a long distance. And along that whole way, you could see every few feet or so, you could see another cross of someone. They literally lined 100 miles of byway with crosses, with crucified men, so that everyone going by could see what is your fate and what is your destiny if you so dare to cross the Roman Empire. So this was something and it was an excruciating death that I've described it to you. And this is how the method that was used to kill Yahshua. But the funny thing was that the joke was on them. Because as painful and as agonizing a death as that was, what the cross was, what it amounted to in effect, was the throne. And I know that that's kind of weird to look at it that way, but that's exactly what it was. Because Yahshua said, what? In John chapter 12. See, the very instrument that was being used to humiliate him and to shame him and to make him, cower before the power of Rome was the very thing that elevated him forever, right? And Yahshua answered them, saying, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And there's that first term there, seeing there, not the first time, I'm just saying that we looked at today, this term Son of Man, okay, which corresponds to the Hebrew term Ben Adam. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls onto the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And he goes on from there. But a little bit further down, he says what? He says, when they hear this voice, and it was in Yahshua answered and said, this voice has not come for my sake, but for your sakes. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world, who is that? That's Satan. The ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. The Son of Man must be lifted up. Right? The crowd answered, we have heard out the law, Messiah is to remain forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Good question. Yahshua said to them, for a little while longer, the light is among you. And he goes on from there. Okay. But he says that if I am lifted up from this earth, I will draw all men to myself. So his cross, in effect, became a throne. What you see him describing in John 12 and what you see described in his being lifted up on the cross is an ascendancy of the Son of Man, which you see described where? In Daniel 7. So when they heard the term Son of Man, any of these individuals, they would have known very clearly to what he was referring, because Son of Man is Daniel language. And every Jew would have known that. And perhaps some of the Gentiles would have known that as well. So over in Mark chapter 9, this is with his disciples, verse 30. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Yahshua did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. And again over in Mark chapter 2, when you come back to Capernaum, right? And then he says, why are you reasoning? Let's see. This is when the person was lowered down because he wanted to be healed, and they lowered him through Peter's roof. Why are you reasoning about these things in your hearts? When he said, your sins are forgiven, and people were looking at him, especially the religious leaders were looking at him funny. Why are you reasoning about these things in your heart? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and pick up your pallet and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said that paralytic, I say to you, get up, pick up your pallet, and go home. You see. So he uses Son of Man, and the point I wanted to share here is that when they hear the term Son of Man, for us, it's kind of an unusual term, but for them, it would have not been unusual at all. Because where does it come from? As you're going to see in a minute, it comes straight out of Daniel 7. And because it comes straight out of Daniel 7, which is apocalyptic, which is metaphorical language, they would have known exactly what he was referring to. This is why the high priest and all these folks were so bent out of shape when he referred to himself as the Son of Man, right? Because they knew. Sometimes people will say, and you hear this from scholars all the time, and I think that that it's they're not reading carefully. Oh, he never claimed he was the Messiah. First of all, Yahshua never used the term. True enough, he never used the term Messiah for himself. Or if you look in the modern day versions, it'll say Christ, right? He never referred to himself as Christ or Messiah. What he referred to himself, for the most part, more than anything else, is what? Is that term, Son of Man. Why? What does that even mean? Well, what it means, Son of Man, Ben Adam, it is a reference to, it's like saying human being, mortal. And some versions will actually translate it as mortal. Well, that's weird, right? It's human being, mortal. What in the world does that mean? Well, it's Daniel language. In other words, this is the true mortal. This is the new human. This is the true humanity. This is the one who is in the, because when we hear human beings, okay, big deal, human being. We got to get out of that thinking. Because we have to understand that a human being was made in the image of Elohim. And his vocation, her vocation, is to be an image bearer of Elohim. So to be human means to be one to rule with Yahweh. That is our ultimate destiny. to be stewards of the earth the way that they were intended to in Eden. So to say son of man, he's a son. It's like the son when you look in the writings talking about Elisha and Elijah, it's talking about, you'll see a term son of the prophets. That doesn't mean that those people were physical descendants of the prophets. It's a term like you would say, today, Sons of Anarchy, right? Which is, a show, right? None of those people, what is anarchy? Anarchy is an idea. It's not a person. You're not saying son of the person, right? You're saying a son of an idea. So it's son of this. So biblically, you'll see things that say son of, Joseph or whatever, right? Physically. But you also have this concept of like something like son of the prophets, meaning these are disciples of the prophets. This is part of a group of prophets. So son of man is saying son of human beings. It's a representative of human beings. Some of you may have seen the Lord of the Rings series, right? A son of Gondor. What is that? It's a representative of Gondor. It's one of the young men of Gondor, one of the warriors of Gondor. It's kind of like that, right? So son of man is in effect just a very poetic way of saying a human being, a mortal, but not just any human being, a mortal, because that term son of man is used very specifically in Daniel 9, in that context of Daniel 9, which is prophetic in nature. It's a specific son of man. And this is the title that Yahshua uses for himself. So don't tell me that he didn't refer to himself as the Messiah. No, he wasn't going to come out flat out and say, I'm the Messiah and be on the nose. You tell me. It's like he said to John, when John sent the disciples saying, hey, tell me, are you the one to come, or should we be waiting for someone else? Because John was, he was suffering. And he says, he didn't go back and say, yeah, tell John, yeah, I'm him. Don't worry, it's all good. No, he said, tell John what you see. The lame are walking, the deaf are hearing, the blind their eyes are open. You tell me, John. You make the declaration based on the evidence, and this is the same thing that's happening here. He didn't come flat out and say, I'm the Messiah. But he said, I'm the Son of Man. And they knew exactly what he was talking about. So when you go over to, someplace like Matthew, 26. Let me see if I have it right. Yeah, this is when the high priest confronts him. The high priest stood up. This is Matthew 26:62. And we could find it in the parallel gospels also. The high priest stood up and said to him, do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you? But Yahshua kept silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living Elohim that you tell us whether you are the Messiah, the son of Elohim. Oh, interesting. Just got straight to the point. Notice what Yahshua said. He didn't say, yes, I am. Yahshua said to him, you have said it yourself. It's come out of your mouth. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Now, this word power is a substitute for the name of Yahweh. He would have said, you will see, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of Yahweh and coming on the clouds of heaven. What is this? This is Daniel language, right? So he uses the name of Yahweh, which already is taboo by that time. So he offends them that way. But then on top of that, he's essentially saying, I'm the Messiah. I'm the one that you see described in Daniel 7. You don't think they knew that? You better believe they knew that. The very next verse, then the high priest tore his robes and said he has blasphemed. Why would he react that way? He tore his clothes. To tear your clothes was a symbol of grief and of anger. He tore his robes and said he has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? You've heard it yourself. They answer, he deserves death. Really? From a few words? You better believe it. Because essentially what he was saying very clearly in unmistakable terms, that I am the one described in Daniel chapter 7. From now on, you're going to see him sitting at the right hand of power, on the right hand of Yahweh, and coming on the clouds of heaven. So that very instrument that the Romans thought they were using to crush him was the instrument that was the one that was elevating him, that was raising him, ascending him to the throne, a la Daniel 7, you see. So what could any world power do? The ultimate power they have over you on this earth is to take your life. After that, what else can they do to you? But not even that was enough in the case of Yahshua, which is what the beauty of it was. That in their minds, we took away his life. In their thinking, And Yahshua knew that that would not be the end, that he would rise again. So the ultimate victory, the ultimate thing that the Romans could do to him, that a world power, that the beasts could do to him, was to take his life. But it wasn't enough, because he was meant for life, because he's the author of life. And he's described as such in the sacred scriptures. The author of life is one of the verses that, in the New Testament, that describes him. The author of life. So what do you see? So what is the whole story of this? It's the beasts crushed. It's what Yahshua did in his life, in his first appearing in the flesh, as he went around, as you see in the Gospels, as he went around healing, and as he went around even raising from the dead. He was destroying the power of the beasts, you understand, in every manifestation, because he's the author of life. And the beasts could not crush him, you see. So Yahshua is the culmination of the Israel story. It's the culmination of the Adam story. He is the second Adam. What Adam could not accomplish, Yahshua has accomplished, you see. Let's go back to Daniel. And then we'll get to the video. So the beasts are doing their thing. And one last thing I'll mention before the video, Daniel is structured in a way that's very interesting, because it shows you, it repeats themes over and over again. So you see, Daniel, well, let me show it to you so you can see it. So you see Daniel 3, where Daniel's friends are thrown into the furnace. We've all heard that story of Daniel's friends in the fire, and they're delivered by Almighty Yahweh. What is that? It's the beasts in the form of the Babylonians, the beasts crushing the people of Yahweh. And the people are still victorious through the power of Yahweh. And then Daniel 6 is another version of that, right? When Daniel in the lion's den, yes? So he's thrown into the lion's den, and once again, literally the beasts are supposed to come upon him, and they don't. Their mouths are stopped. And instead, it comes back upon his oppressors. And this is in the time of the Persians, by the way. No matter what kingdom it is, Babylon, Persia, doesn't matter. Ultimately, Almighty Yahweh has the victory. And it'd be the same with the next beast, with the Greeks. And it'd be the same with the next one, with the Romans, right? And it's going to be the same with the last one, as is described in the book of Revelation as well, you see. Okay, let's go over to the, so these are things that are precursor to what's happening in 7, and chapter 7 sort of wraps it up. So all the things you saw happening in Daniel 3 and in Daniel 6, now they're being sort of summarized in Daniel 7, because history continues to repeat itself. The beasts, the powers of this world, they continue to do their thing, but ultimately they're going to meet the same fate as the ones in Daniel 3 and the ones in Daniel 6. They will be put to nothing. But, they might kill a few of us along the way. But ultimately the victory is going to go to the one that Yahweh has installed as king. Because the king of Persia, the king of Babylon, the king of Greece, the king of Rome, the king of whatever's coming up next, doesn't matter. Because it's not their power, it's not their authority, right? All right, let's take a look at this video. And I think what I will do is, I need to book it up here real quick, so just give me a minute. And this is just 5 minutes. And then we'll wrap up Daniel 7 and we'll be done. So, okay, at this time, let me give you... Let me make the share sound and optimize the video clip. Okay, so let's take a look at this video. And I'm gonna turn my video off for the moment here. And I'll also turn off my sound in a moment. Okay, here we go.
If you read the New Testament, you'll notice that the most common title people use to describe Jesus is the Christ. That is, the Messiah.
But surprisingly, Jesus almost never used that word to describe himself. Instead, he called himself the Son of Man.
The Son of Man. What does that mean?
Well, the phrase comes from an chapter in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Daniel was an Israelite prisoner of war who was forced to live in the empire of Babylon and work for the prideful, violent king who destroyed his home.
That sounds horrible.
And while he was living and working in Babylon, Daniel had this crazy prophetic dream. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
He saw 4 beasts crawling out of a dark sea, hybrid monster-like animals, each scarier than the one before. And the 4th beast is so mutant, there's nothing to compare it to. And it's violent, leaving death and destruction in its wake.
What in the world is this about?
Well, he's told that these beasts symbolize violent, prideful kings and their empires.
Oh, like the one Daniel's enslaved to.
Yeah, and these creatures might seem random to you, but these images are developing an important biblical theme. How humans are these remarkable creatures, capable of doing great good and horrible evil.
How we can behave like animals.
Right. Look at the first pages of the Bible. God creates the beasts of the field and humans together, all from the dust. But then the humans are set apart and given a royal task of being God's image.
So humans are like the animals, but called to become much more.
Yeah, they're to be God's representatives on earth, ruling on his behalf, like kings and queens. But keep reading, and the humans are deceived by a beast who says that they could be more than just God's partners.
Yeah, that they could rule the world on their own terms, which sounds good to them.
But God knows this will be a disaster. And so he expels the humans to the realm of the beasts.
The partnership is lost.
But God makes a promise that one day a human will be born who won't give in to the beast. Rather, he'll overcome and strike the beast while being struck by it.
Okay, so for the rest of the biblical story, we're waiting for that human. But instead, in story after story, we find people acting like beasts.
Yeah, like in the next story about Cain, who's jealous and angry at his brother Abel. God warns Cain that he's facing a beastly urge called sin, a dark, mysterious kind of evil that consumes humans. But God says that Cain can rule the beast if he chooses.
But he doesn't rule the beast. He lets this urge devour him, and he becomes a beast.
And then after this, Cain's children spread their animal-like violence, and it leads to the founding of a whole civilization known for its beastly pride, the city of Babylon.
Okay, Babylon. So fast forward, this is where Daniel is enslaved, having this bizarro dream.
Exactly. Now, watch what happens next in Daniel's dream. He sees into God's throne room where a court is set up, and God condemns the beast to destruction.
That's great.
And then Daniel sees that there's actually more than one divine throne.
Oh, right, the throne that humanity left behind.
Right. There hasn't been a human who's able to overcome the beast and rule alongside God until now. Daniel sees a figure called the Son of Man, which means a human. And he rides on a cloud up into God's presence and then sits down on the divine throne to rule the world.
The partnership's renewed.
Yes, and even more, all humanity worships and serves this Son of Man alongside God.
Huh, worship? So this is no ordinary human. This is like a God human.
Exactly. And so now you can see why Jesus of Nazareth, when he came onto the scene centuries later, chose this title, the Son of Man, for himself. He was claiming to be that truly human one on a mission to confront the beast.
He was tempted to seize power on the beast's terms.
But unlike every human before him, Jesus resisted the urge. And then he went about banishing the beast from people's lives, and he was teaching people how to rule the beast instead of being ruled by it.
Okay, so how do you rule the beast?
Well, Jesus did it by giving up his life.
Wait, rule the beast by dying?
Yes, when Jesus was on trial in a human courtroom and being condemned to death, he said, "From this moment on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at God's right hand and coming on the clouds."
But this is the moment he's about to die.
Exactly. From one perspective, the cross looks like a beastly torture device, but Jesus viewed it as his throne. And on this throne, he exposed the subhuman nature of our evil by letting it do its worst, and then he overcame it with his divine life and love. Jesus' execution was his exaltation.
So Jesus is the first human to overcome the beast, and as a result, he can partner with God to rule the world.
And so now, Jesus is summoning a new humanity into existence, one that can overcome the beast in the same paradoxical way.
To rule the beast by dying.
And then by discovering that Jesus' life and power can become our life and power. So we can rule the world as God's partners, but Jesus style, in the power of service, humility, and self-giving love.
Can everyone hear me again and see me? Great. I hope that you found that as inspiring as I did. That's 5 minutes of time well spent, and I would encourage you to take a close look at that 2 or 3 times, and you'll really glean some good stuff from that. So let's finish up in the next half hour or so here in Daniel, and he's really encapsulated. Oops, I'm sorry. I had my microphone away from my mouth. Hopefully you're all hearing me a little bit better. He's really, Tim Mackie that is, he's really encapsulated the whole lesson and everything he's saying. But it's worth it to take a look here at the a little bit more in depth. So 7:13 starts to describe after the beast does its thing, or while the beast is doing its thing. He says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So he ascends to the throne. And remember, this is metaphorical language. This is not necessarily literally coming up in the clouds. This could be an interdimensional thing. In other words, this concept of the heavens opening, the heaven and earth situation where that veil is removed, if you will. And to him, to Yahshua, to the Son of Man, to him was given dominion. So the dominion that others have sought was taken away from them and given to him. Remember, Yahshua says about Satan in John 12, he says, the ruler of this earth is about to be brought down, right? I'm paraphrasing, but the ruler of this world is about to lose his dominion. Glory and the kingdom, that all the people, to him was given dominion, glory, and the kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. What is that? That's a reversal of Babylon, right? Of the Tower of Babel. That all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. At the Tower of Babel, what happened? Peoples, nations, and men of every language, they tried to get together to do something in opposition to Yahweh for their own self-aggrandizement. And instead, Yahweh dispersed them and he confused their languages. So when you go to the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 2, on Pentecost Day, what happens? You see a reversal of that. The Spirit of Yahweh is given, and everybody hears the gospel message in their own language. A reunification, no matter what ethnicity. Remember how many ethnicities were represented? There were, people from this place and that place and Cappadocia and everything else, right? They were all there in one place, all hearing the same message in their own language. But it was as if it were one, right? Because this was the beginning of this push to reunite all these peoples. So Yahshua's disciples would do the same thing that their master was doing in terms of uniting people everywhere. And that's been the story of the gospel ever since, where people are being called from the four corners of the earth to come into his presence and to reverse what occurred at the Tower of Babel. His dominion, back to Daniel 7:14, his dominion is an everlasting dominion, will not pass away, right? It will never go away now. This is why he tells the high priest, it's interesting, he's looking at the high priest, and is high priest the high priest, right? But Yahshua is the true high priest. And he says to him, from now on, from this day, from now on, you're going to see the Son of Man coming, right? Because this was what was happening. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. It's an everlasting dominion. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who was standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. That's you. That's me. And then he goes on, he talks a little bit more about the last beast, about the 4th beast. We won't go into all that right now because it's not really so important for the message. But this is what's being described. This is the last one, the last beast. And you see more of that described in the book of Revelation, of course. And it says he will speak, they're speaking about this last beast, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. And they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Right, so this concept of they'll be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. In other words, everything has to be fulfilled in the way that Yahweh intends for it to be fulfilled. But the court will sit for judgment. His dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Now, this is very interesting, and I won't go into this right now because it could be controversial, right? But is this talking about, in fact, a final persecution, a final king, final anti-Messiah that will come? Or is this all referring to back in Rome? There's debate among scholars about that, right? I think that history repeats itself, but that's a discussion for another day. I'm hoping at some point to do a more thorough study of the book of Revelation, but I haven't quite had the strength or the courage to do that just yet. So we'll see what happens in the future. Okay. But just to go back to some last minute points. Let me see. Give me a moment. Let me pull the other screen. Okay. And then we'll come back to that. And you should see the notes on your screen momentarily here. Okay. So just going back to these notes here, right? So in Daniel chapters 1 through 6, we are introduced to the line of David. Daniel 1:3, the seed of the kingdom that is taken into exile in Babylon. That's Daniel and the fellow Jews who went into Babylon with him. Throughout Daniel 1 through 6, the line of David is faced with a test of allegiance to Yahweh. The famous stories, for example, of the fiery furnace and the lion's den, which I shared with you in Daniel 3 and Daniel 6. Daniel and his companions are all threatened with death to give allegiance to the kings of Babylon and Persia, and they refuse. This leads to their death in Daniel chapters 3 and 6. In other words, and he puts death in quotations because they're not really killed, right? It doesn't reach that point. This leads to their death in Daniel chapters 3 and 6, but Yahweh intervenes to redeem them from death. And this is all about redemption, right? After this vindication, Daniel and the friends are elevated to rule over the empire alongside the king. Sounds like Joseph. And this is the story of mankind over and over. Because there's always someone, right? Here it's Daniel. Way back when it was Joseph. So Joseph is elevated. It's like Yahweh gives precursors. He gives previews, right? He gives previews of what's to come. So in elevating Joseph over Egypt, the greatest world power of that time, in elevating Joseph over Egypt, he gives a taste of what is to come. As Joseph becomes what? A ruler over Egypt, a ruler over humanity. Just like we will be rulers over humanity someday. And same thing with Daniel and his friends. Redemption. It's a story of redemption. In other words, you're exiled, but it's not going to be that way forever. Exile is the exile out of Eden. You're sent out to die outside of Eden, but it's not forever because there's going to be redemption. You're going to be restored to life, which is why the Bible ends in the book of Revelation where where? Right back to the tree of life, where we were in the very beginning. You see, it all comes full circle. These narratives 4 and Daniel 1 to 6 are combined. So let me ask you a question. I'll stop here for just a second. Is anyone, if you're paying really close attention to what I'm saying to you here, does any of this sound possible that human beings could just craft with that Bible, could just come up with a story that, let me tell you something, the best screenwriters in all of history could not have come up with a story this perfect over the course of 1,500 years, which is from the time that the first writings of the Bible to what we have last in the canon. There's a course of about 1,500 years. Is it possible to have a 1,500-year conspiracy where human beings could conspire with one another to have a thread like this going through the scriptures? There's no way. There's no way. Anyone who can hear all of that and still believe that the Bible is just some dusty old man-made book that doesn't have any relevance in our time, I'm sorry for them. I'm sorry for them. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in here. If we're not paying attention to this, if we're not giving it our due diligence, we are hurting ourselves. That's just a quick aside. We need to pay attention to these things. This is our destiny, my friends. Point 4. These narratives in Daniel 1 through 6 are combined and replayed in a dream Daniel has in chapter 7, which takes the royal seat of Daniel. Remember, always go back to Genesis 3:15, right? When he said about the seed, you're gonna crush his, bruise his heel, but he's gonna crush your head. So these narratives in Daniel 1 to 6 are combined and replayed in a dream Daniel has in chapter 7, which takes the royal seed of Daniel and the friends and combines them with all the narrative images that we explored earlier. And the combined portrait is astounding. I agree. 5. Instead of a snake, we find a horde of mutant beasts. That's a good way to put it. Mutant beasts crawling out of a dark, chaotic sea to wreak violence on the earth. Daniel 7, 1 to 8. And we read that. But all of a sudden, the Creator takes his heavenly throne and brings eternal justice upon the beast and its evil. Daniel 7, 9 through 12. Then comes the climax of the dream in verses 13 and 14. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And let me just take one more deviation here for a minute here. That's not really a deviation, but I want you to always to pay attention, right? Because these people were well versed in Scripture. The Pauls of the world, the Peters of the world. So when you go over to a place like Ephesians 6, and you start talking about the armor, right? Finally be strong. This is Ephesians 6:10. Finally be strong in Yahweh and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of Yahweh. And you can see these are allusions to in Isaiah 65 and other places, so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against what? Against the rulers, against the powers, the horns, right? Against the world forces of this darkness, the beasts, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. That's what we're doing battle against, right? You see this language used again and again. Let me see if I can find it a little bit further up here. Let's see. So this is Ephesians 1. These are in accordance with the working of the strength of his might, which he brought about in Messiah when he raised him from the dead. He ascended to his throne, right? And seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places. What is that? That's Daniel language. Far above all rule and authority and power and dominion and every name that is named not only in this age but also in the age to come. And he put all things in subjection under his feet and gave him as head over all things to the assembly, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. And by the way, I want you to note the tense. And he put all things in subjection under his feet, right? He raised him from the dead, seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above every ruler and authority and power and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this age, but in the one to come. Then, and now, and future. And he put all things in subjection under his feet. Then it's saying, and he began to put all things in subjection, and he plans now to put all things that he put, done. And he put all things in subjection under his feet and gave him as head over all things to the assembly, which is his body, to his saints, the fullness of him who lies all in all. This is when I say that the kingdom has come. Present. We're in a mop-up operation, you understand. We're announcing the kingdom that is here. He's in power. He's in charge now. Not future date. Not sometime in the future. Well, someday. No. He's going to return, but he's in authority now. You, me, we have the authority to announce that kingdom now. Okay? But notice the powers and everything. Okay? And there are other places we can go where it talks about the powers of the throne and things of that nature. And this is what it's referring to. So there's much more that we could do there, but I'm gonna go back to the notes and finish this up. Okay, so point 5a. Here, this is in Daniel 7:13-14. We see the original human calling restored, the original human calling, vocation, restored to a figure who will rule alongside Elohim as an eternal partner. The everlasting rule of the Son of Man will take place after the beastly evil of human empires has been done away with, so that only the rule of Elohim and the Son of Man remains. This is why I say we're in a cleanup, a mop-up operation, because there's still some powers that still think they have authority, right? And remember that 1,000 years is like a day to Almighty Yahweh. So the fact that 2,000 years has gone by from some of it, to us, it's a lot, right? Because we're flesh and blood, and our lifespan is relatively small. But in the big picture, it's nothing to Yahweh. This is as good as it happened yesterday. You understand? Notice that in the day. So don't get fazed by the time element, right? Because Yahweh exists outside of time. The only reason time exists for us is because why? We have a system with planets and, the earth revolving around the sun, right? That takes 365 days. We call it a year. If you're going by the lunar calendar, it takes 354 days. And then, when you multiply that by the years of history, to us, it seems like it's a lot. But Yahweh's outside of this system. So for him, it's just, it's a drop in the bucket. So let's not get caught up in the years. Notice that in the stories of Daniel 3 and 6, the seed of David, the descendancy of David, is brought through persecution and death. The furnace in chapter 3 and the lion's den in chapter 6. In other words, they pass through death to life. What is that? It's resurrection, right? Redemption. And then elevated to rule beside the king. So here in Daniel 7, the Son of Man is brought up from the realm of the violent beast to rule over all creation. So the violent beasts try to kill, but then they can't hold you down. And see, this is the culminating image that summarizes the messianic hope of the Hebrew scriptures. Notice that the heavenly beings play a key role in Daniel's dream. These are the ones surrounding the throne, right? They are surrounding the eternal throne, Daniel 7:10. But the Son of Man is elevated to rule over them as well, because the Son of Man is over all. We are back to our foundational images from Genesis 1-2. We looked at that. And Psalm 8, which we didn't look at, which we'll look at as the final verse, the final passage. Psalm 8 and Psalm 110. Humanity was called by Yahweh to transcend their mortal origins and discover their elevated purpose to rule over heaven and earth, which is only possible if they accept Yahweh's gift of eternal life. And then finally, Daniel 7 is a poetic dream image of the fulfillment of Yahweh's promise in Genesis 3:15. We're back to Genesis 3:15. An eternal human who is exalted to rule as an Elohim human partner over all creation. And that's exactly right. I love, for any of you who's seen the movie The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, you see the very first scene, you see the Messiah praying in the garden and a serpent coming around him, and then he gets up and he stomps on the serpent's head. That's exactly it. Okay, so let's go for a final passage over to Psalm 8. And then I'll open it up for any questions. Next time, we're going to start talking about the messianic part of the storyline, Yahshua, his storyline. And that's going to take us at least 3 sessions, maybe 4. If I can consolidate it, I'll consolidate it, but there's just a lot of material to cover there. Okay, Psalm 8. O Yahweh, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth, who have displayed your splendor above the heavens. From the mouth of infants and nursing babes, you have established strength because of your adversaries to make the enemy and the revengeful cease. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than Elohim, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the seas. O Yahweh, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Hallelujah. We could stop the recording at this point.